Have you ever met someone who carries a lifetime of strength in their eyes despite their age? Today we're bringing you a story that's equal parts heartwarming and powerful. At 91, Ben Warren just wanted a peaceful meal at his favorite spot, Martha's Diner. But when a group of bikers decided to test his patience, they got far more than they bargained for. Witness the incredible moment when a call for help brings an unexpected show of solidarity, reminding us all of the values worth standing up for. Before we begin, I would like to extend my deepest appreciation to all veterans for their selfless service to our nation. The warm summer sun was beating down as 91-year-old Ben Warren guided his old pickup truck into the dusty lot of Martha's Diner. At his age, Ben didn't move as swiftly as he used to, but his sharp gaze was a testament to the life he'd lived and the stories he carried. Today was one of his rare outings to town, and as he eased himself out of the truck, a sound broke the quiet afternoon. The low, rumbling roar of motorcycles. 5 motorcycles glided into the parking lot, each gleaming under the afternoon sun, and their riders looked as rough as their bikes. Wearing leather jackets covered in unfamiliar patches, the bikers stepped off and walked toward the diner with the swagger of men who felt the world owed them something. Ben couldn't help but shake his head at the sight. In his day, men carried themselves with a different kind of dignity. He straightened his back, adjusted his veteran's cap, and moved toward the entrance just as one of the bikers stepped in front of him. "Hold up there, old man," sneered the biker, a tall guy with an unruly beard and a nasty grin. "Ain't it past your bedtime?" Ben met the man's gaze steadily. "Son, I've been awake before you were even a thought in your daddy's head. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'd like to get my lunch." The biker's friends laughed, forming a loose circle around Ben. Another chimed in, a stocky guy with a spider tattoo across his neck. "Looks like we've got ourselves a tough guy, huh? What's the matter, Grandpa? Forget your meds this morning?" Ben felt his jaw clench, but he kept his cool. These boys didn't intimidate him. He'd faced worse in his life. After all, he had served his country proudly, fought in wars these young men only knew from movies. "I'd appreciate it if you boys would step aside and let me pass," he said, his voice calm but firm. The lead biker, his breath stinking of beer and cigarettes, leaned in close. "Or what, Grandpa? You gonna call the retirement home on us?" Inside the diner, patrons began to notice the commotion. Behind the counter, Martha, a tough, stout woman in her 60s who'd known Ben for years, was already reaching for the phone. But Ben wasn't backing down. His weathered hands balled into fists at his sides as he looked each of the men in the eyes. "Last chance, boys," he said, his voice low and steady. "Let me pass or things might get uncomfortable for you." The bikers roared with laughter. "You hear that, Spike?" the leader shouted to one of his buddies, a giant of a man with tattoos crawling up his arms. "The old man thinks he's gonna teach us a lesson." Spike cracked his knuckles. "Maybe we ought to show Gramps here what real respect looks like." Ben held his ground, sizing up the bikers. His back ached, his knees protested, but a lifetime of resilience kicked in. These boys clearly hadn't met their match yet, but Ben wasn't going to let them intimidate him. Slowly, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his cell phone. The lead biker laughed louder. "Oh no, boys, Grandpa's calling for backup." He snatched the phone out of Ben's hand and held it high. "Who you gonna call, old man? The geriatric squad?" Ben's voice stayed calm, but his eyes held a steely edge. "Son, you're making a big mistake. Give me back my phone and we can all walk away from this." The biker dangled the phone mockingly. "Or what? You gonna bore us with stories about the good old days?" Martha, watching the scene unfold from the diner, spoke urgently into her phone. "Yes, police, we've got a situation here at Martha's Diner. A group of bikers is harassing an elderly man. Please send someone quick." Outside, Ben's gaze remained fixed on the biker, his voice steady. "I've dealt with bullies my whole life. You think you're tough? You haven't seen tough." The lead biker's smirk faded for a brief second but quickly returned. "Big words from a little old man. You gonna shuffle on home now before you break a hip?" The men erupted in laughter, and Ben felt his patience wearing thin. He had fought on battlefields, endured nights in foxholes, and seen friends lost. There was nothing these punks could do to scare him. "You want my phone? You got it," he said, and with a flick of his wrist he tossed the phone into the air. The lead biker, surprised, fumbled to catch it, and in that split second Ben moved. Using reflexes honed by years of training, he grabbed the man's wrist, twisted, and sent him sprawling onto the ground with a thud. The other bikers froze, disbelief on their faces as they saw their friend knocked down by a man nearly 4 times their age. Ben adjusted his cap, his gaze never wavering. "Anyone else want to try?" The men's laughter faded, replaced by looks of anger and embarrassment. The lead biker scrambled up, face flushed with rage. "You're dead, old man," he spat, advancing toward Ben. But before he could make another move, the rumble of approaching motorcycles filled the air. The bikers turned, and so did Ben, who allowed himself a small smile as the cavalry arrived. A dozen motorcycles rolled into the parking lot, each carrying a weathered man who looked as though he'd seen his share of battles. At the front of the pack was Harry, Ben's old war buddy, a man as tough and proud as he was. Harry dismounted, his movements stiff but resolute. He gave Ben a quick nod. "Everything all right here, Ben?" Ben shrugged, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Just a friendly chat, Harry. These young folks were about to show me some respect." The lead biker, realizing the numbers were now against him, tried to keep his composure. "Look, we don't want any trouble, all right? Just a misunderstanding." Harry stepped forward, his gaze cold. "Well, you found trouble, son, and you might want to show a little respect to a man who's earned it." Ben looked at the bikers, then at his friends who had come to stand by his side. "Boys," he said, his voice carrying a quiet authority. An apology wouldn't be out of line. The bikers muttered quick apologies, backing away. They mounted their motorcycles, and with a final glare in Ben's direction, they roared out of the parking lot. As the dust settled, Ben turned to Harry and the other veterans, a glint of gratitude in his eye. "Appreciate the backup, Harry." Harry clapped him on the shoulder. "Any time, Ben. That's what brothers do." They walked into Martha's diner together, and as the patrons inside erupted in applause, Ben felt a warm pride that had nothing to do with the confrontation. He'd stood his ground, sure, but more than that, he was reminded that even after all these years, some bonds never break. The next morning, Ben Warren woke to a soft golden sunrise filtering through his bedroom window. He hadn't slept this well in ages, and the events of the previous day replayed in his mind as he brewed his coffee. Facing down those bikers with his old friend Harry had left him feeling invigorated, but there was something else beneath the satisfaction, a lingering unease. As Ben sipped his coffee, his phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen and saw a message from Harry. "Need to talk. Meet you at the diner in an hour?" Ben's eyebrows raised. It wasn't like Harry to send such a serious message, especially after the fun they'd had standing up to those punks yesterday. Something about it gave Ben pause. He finished his coffee, grabbed his jacket, and headed out the door toward Martha's diner, feeling a tinge of curiosity mixed with concern. When he arrived, the diner was already humming with early morning patrons. Martha waved from behind the counter as he entered, her smile warm. She knew him well enough to read the questions in his eyes. "Your friend's in the back booth," she said quietly, nodding toward Harry, who sat waiting, looking unusually pensive. Ben slid into the booth across from Harry, who nodded in greeting but kept his gaze focused on his mug. "Thanks for coming, Ben. I needed to tell you something important," Harry began, his voice low. "Harry, what's on your mind? You've got me all curious," Ben replied, trying to lighten the mood. Harry sighed, rubbing his hands together. "You remember yesterday after the bikers left? Well, I thought it was over, but later that night I got a message. From an old contact." Ben raised an eyebrow, intrigued. He hadn't heard Harry talk about his contacts in years, not since their days serving in the military. "A contact? You're saying there's more to this?" Harry nodded. "Ben, those bikers weren't just some rowdy kids looking for trouble. They're part of a gang that's been causing problems around town lately. Petty crimes, intimidation, even rumors of smuggling. The contact warned me that yesterday's incident didn't sit well with their leader, and they're likely to come back." Ben crossed his arms, the weight of Harry's words settling over him. "So you're saying they might be back for round 2? "Exactly, and this time they won't be caught off guard," Harry replied, his expression grim. "They'll probably come looking to make a point." A wave of concern washed over Ben. While he was more than capable of handling himself, he knew the risks of taking on a gang. They weren't just dealing with a few unruly bikers. They were up against men with a taste for trouble and revenge. "So what do we do, Harry?" he asked, his tone serious. Harry glanced around as if ensuring no one was eavesdropping. "I've already contacted some old friends," he said. "Guys we served with. They're scattered around the area, but they're willing to come here and help us keep things under control. They understand what it means to stand together." Ben's eyes widened. The thought of gathering their old comrades hadn't even crossed his mind, but hearing Harry mention it stirred something within him. A deep sense of loyalty and a connection to a past that he hadn't felt in years. "Are you sure they're willing to come all this way?" Ben asked, realizing the weight of what Harry was proposing. Harry nodded firmly. Every one of them said the same thing. They'd be here in a heartbeat. We've still got each other's backs, no matter how much time has passed. And if we're dealing with a gang, we'll need all the backup we can get. Ben was silent for a moment, letting the impact of Harry's words sink in. The idea of reuniting with his old friends brought a surge of pride, but also a sense of responsibility. If they were to face down this gang together, they'd be doing it not just for themselves, but for their town and for the principles they had always fought to protect. "All right, Harry," he said finally, meeting his friend's gaze. "Let's get the team together. If these boys want to fight, they're going to find themselves up against men who know what real loyalty and strength look like." Harry's face broke into a rare grin. "Knew you'd say that, Ben. Knew it." The next few days passed quickly. Harry made the calls, and slowly, old friends began trickling into town. Some arrived on motorcycles, others in old pickup trucks, each with their own stories and memories that had only grown richer with time. They gathered at the diner each morning, discussing their plan and strategizing about how to handle any trouble that might come their way. One of the first to arrive was Jack Mercer, a wiry man with a quick wit and an even quicker temper. "Haven't lost your touch, have you, Ben?" he teased as he clasped Ben's hand in greeting. Ben chuckled. "Never needed it much around here. Until now, I guess." The others followed in a steady stream. Doc, a former medic with a gentle heart but nerves of steel. Shorty, who was anything but short, standing a good 6'5" with a laugh that could fill a room. And Andy, a quiet man with eyes that seemed to see right through you. As they reunited, their easy camaraderie resurfaced as if they'd only parted ways yesterday. As they planned their next move, Ben felt a renewed sense of purpose among his old friends. They were no longer the young men who had faced down the dangers of war, but the strength of their bond hadn't diminished. When trouble came knocking, they were ready to face it side by side, just like they always had. The gang of bikers hadn't yet reappeared, but Ben and the others knew it was only a matter of time. They remained vigilant, staying close to the diner and keeping watch. In the evenings, they'd gather in small groups, telling stories and reminiscing, but their eyes would often wander to the street, scanning for any signs of trouble. Finally, one evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, Ben spotted them. A line of motorcycles appeared at the edge of town, heading straight for the diner. He glanced at Harry, who nodded, his face set in determination. "Showtime," Harry muttered, straightening his jacket. Ben felt a thrill of adrenaline as he turned to his old friends. "This is it, boys. Let's show them what they're up against." The veterans filed outside, forming a silent wall in front of the diner. The bikers slowed as they approached, their confident expressions faltering as they took in the sight of the dozen old-timers standing shoulder to shoulder. Though the veterans were well into their later years, their presence radiated an unspoken authority, a respect earned through decades of loyalty and sacrifice. The lead biker sneered, but his voice wavered slightly. "What's this, a senior citizen parade?" Ben took a step forward, meeting the man's gaze. "We don't want trouble." But if you're here to cause any, you'll be dealing with all of us." A tense silence fell, the weight of Ben's words settling over the bikers. For a long moment, it seemed like they might push forward, might test the resolve of the men before them. But one by one, the bikers' smirks faded, replaced by uncertainty. They realized they weren't just facing a group of old men. They were standing before men who had spent their lives fighting for each other, men who would defend their town and each other without hesitation. The lead biker spat on the ground, giving Ben a final glare before turning to his friends. "Let's go," he muttered, revving his engine. One by one, the bikers followed, their engines roaring as they sped away. Ben watched until they disappeared into the night, a quiet pride filling him. He looked around at his friends, each one a piece of his history, his family. They didn't need to say anything. They understood each other perfectly. With a small nod to his friends, Ben turned and led the way back into the diner. They may have been older now, but their strength and their loyalty remained as strong as ever. And as they sat together, sharing quiet laughter and reminiscing, they knew they'd face anything together just as they always had. The morning after their silent showdown with the bikers, Ben Warren was up early, tending to the small patch of garden behind his house. Despite his age, he moved with a certain quiet energy. The events of the past days still lingered in his mind, especially the reunion with his old friends. Their presence had stirred memories of camaraderie, of times when they'd had to rely on each other for survival. It was good to see them again, even if under strange circumstances. As he straightened up, wiping his brow, he noticed his grandson Liam walking up the path. Liam was a thoughtful young man, in his early 20s, who had always been curious about Ben's life, though he was often too shy to ask about the war stories he sensed behind his grandfather's quiet demeanor. "Morning, Grandpa," Liam greeted, a hint of curiosity in his eyes. "I heard about what happened at the diner last night." Ben raised an eyebrow, a small smile forming. News traveled fast in a small town like theirs, and he wasn't surprised Liam had heard about the veterans facing off with the bikers. "Word does get around, doesn't it?" he replied, motioning for Liam to sit down on a nearby bench. "They said you and some of the other guys stood up to them," Liam continued, his admiration clear. "People in town are calling you all heroes." Ben chuckled, shaking his head. "Heroes? No, Liam, we just did what needed to be done. Nothing more, nothing less." But he could tell that Liam wanted to know more, to understand the deeper connection he had with his old friends. Ben paused, considering how to explain something that had shaped his entire life. "Have I ever shown you my challenge coin?" he asked, reaching into his pocket to pull out a small, well-worn coin that gleamed softly in the morning light. It was a simple piece of metal, engraved with a design that held meaning only to those who understood its history. Liam's eyes widened slightly as he looked at the coin, its surface weathered from years of being carried. "Is this from the war?" he asked, his voice filled with reverence. Ben nodded, handing it to him. "Yes, this was given to me and to every man in our unit. It's not much to look at, but it represents something important." He watched as Liam turned the coin over in his hands, examining the engravings of an eagle on one side and the words "Brothers in Arms" on the other, along with the years they'd served together. "That coin is a promise, Liam," Ben continued, "a promise that no matter what, we'd be there for each other." Liam looked up, his brow furrowed in thought. "So, it's like a symbol of loyalty?" "Yes, loyalty and respect," Ben replied. "When we left the military, we all took one of these coins. We made a pact that if any of us were ever in trouble, we could call on each other. No questions asked." Liam's gaze shifted between the coin and his grandfather, understanding dawning in his eyes. "Is that why your friends showed up so quickly?" Ben smiled, nodding. "Exactly. When I realized those bikers were coming back, I reached out to Harry. I didn't have to explain much. He knew exactly what to do. And the others? They came because of this coin, because of the promise we made." Liam handed the coin back, his face filled with respect. "That's incredible, Grandpa. I didn't realize how deep those friendships went." Ben tucked the coin back into his pocket, feeling its familiar weight. We may not be as young as we once were, but that doesn't matter. The bond we have, it doesn't fade. It only grows stronger with time. When you go through things together, tough things, it changes you. You become family. As they sat in silence for a moment, Ben's mind drifted back to the days when he had first earned that coin. He remembered the long, exhausting nights on patrol, the constant tension, the way a single shared look with his comrades could communicate more than words. They'd saved each other's lives more times than he could count, and that coin had become a reminder that they'd always have each other's backs, even long after they left the battlefield. Liam broke the silence, his voice hesitant. Do you think I could have something like that someday? Ben looked at his grandson, pride welling up inside him. It doesn't matter where you serve, Liam, whether in the military, your community, or just among the people you love. It's about building trust, about standing up for what's right and being there for the people who need you. If you live by those values, you'll find that bond too. Just then, the familiar sound of a motorcycle engine broke the peaceful quiet of the morning. Ben turned to see Harry pulling up on his old Harley. He gave them a wave as he climbed off the bike, his face breaking into a wide grin when he saw Liam. "Liam, good to see you, kid," he greeted, clapping him on the shoulder. Liam smiled, still holding on to the awe of everything he'd just learned. "Good to see you too, Mr. Scott." Harry gave Ben a meaningful look. "Ready to head to the diner? The guys are meeting us there to talk about what's next." Ben nodded, standing up and patting Liam on the back. "Why don't you come with us, Liam? It's about time you got to know these men." Liam's face lit up. "Really?" "Really," Ben replied. "I think you'll see something special today." As they made their way to the diner, Liam noticed how his grandfather and Harry moved side by side with an unspoken understanding. It was clear that the friendship they shared ran deeper than any simple words could explain. When they arrived, the rest of the old crew was already seated, exchanging stories and laughs over mugs of coffee. The mood lightened immediately when they saw Liam, welcoming him with warm nods and smiles. He could feel the camaraderie and respect between them all, a quiet strength forged through decades of loyalty. As they all settled in, Harry took a small velvet bag from his pocket and handed it to Ben, who looked puzzled. "What's this?" Ben asked, opening it. Inside were several freshly minted coins, replicas of their original challenge coin, but polished and shining. Harry's voice was gruff, but his expression was soft. "I thought it was about time we passed these down. Liam and the other young ones, they're the future. It's their turn to carry the promise." Ben's face softened with pride as he pulled a coin from the bag and handed it to Liam. "Take this, son," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "This coin represents something bigger than any of us. It's a reminder to stand up for what's right, to be loyal, and to always be there for the people you care about." Liam accepted the coin, staring down at it with reverence, realizing the weight of responsibility and honor that came with it. The men around the table raised their mugs in a toast, and Liam followed, his heart full. The bond he was witnessing was timeless, a legacy of honor and loyalty. He knew he had just become part of something that would stay with him forever. As the toasts finished and laughter filled the diner once more, Ben looked at his grandson, feeling a sense of peace and pride. No matter what challenges lay ahead, he knew that the legacy he and his friends had built would continue on through Liam. And in that moment, he knew that the spirit of their brotherhood would never fade. The afternoon sun cast a warm glow through the windows of the diner, illuminating the worn leather jackets, faded hats, and weathered faces of the veterans gathered around the table. Laughter and conversation filled the room, the easy companionship among the men contrasting with the gravity of the stories they'd all come to share. Liam sat quietly among them, feeling both young and honored to be included. As the talk turned to stories of their days in service, there was a notable shift in the mood. Each man seemed to carry an invisible weight, memories etched deep in their expressions. Ben, sensing the atmosphere, cleared his throat, and the others quieted, giving him their attention. He glanced at Liam, then at his old friends, each a familiar face marked by years of friendship and shared struggle. "We've all been through our share of battles," Ben began, his voice steady but tinged with a gravity that made Liam sit up straighter. But sometimes it's the stories of those we left behind that stick with us the most. The men around him nodded solemnly, eyes lowering in respect as they prepared to listen. Ben's gaze softened as he remembered a young soldier he'd once served alongside, a friend whose laughter had been contagious, whose bravery had inspired everyone in their unit. Jackson, Ben murmured. He was just a kid, barely 20, but he faced things most men can't even imagine. Liam leaned in, intrigued. He'd known his grandfather to be strong and steady, but this was a side of him he'd never seen, a side marked by the weight of memory and loss. Ben continued, describing how Jackson had volunteered for a dangerous mission, knowing the odds and refusing to let anyone else go in his place. He didn't make it back, but because of him, a dozen men did. Ben finished quietly, his eyes distant, his voice low. The silence that followed was thick with respect. Harry, who had been listening intently, cleared his throat, drawing everyone's attention. "I've got a story too, if you don't mind." He leaned back, looking up at the ceiling as he gathered his thoughts. "I was in the jungle, trapped behind enemy lines. We were low on ammo, low on food, and I'll never forget the way Charlie got us through it. He kept our spirits up, wouldn't let any of us give in." Harry's voice faltered slightly as he described how Charlie had taken a bullet meant for him, saving his life in a selfless act of sacrifice. "He was the kind of man who'd give you the shirt off his back," Harry said softly, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I wouldn't be here today if it weren't for him." Around the table, the other men shared similar stories, each tale a thread woven into the fabric of their shared history. They spoke of friends who had saved lives, of men who had refused to back down, who had gone above and beyond the call of duty. These stories, Liam realized, weren't just about the past. They were about a code, a deep sense of honor that defined every man at this table. Liam felt an overwhelming sense of respect for these men, for the sacrifices they had made and the strength it must take to carry such memories. He looked at his grandfather, a newfound admiration in his eyes. Ben had always been a quiet man, unassuming in his ways, but now Liam saw him as a hero, someone who had not only lived through war but carried the legacy of his friends with him. Feeling the weight of the moment, Liam hesitated, then finally spoke. "I had no idea," he said quietly. "I didn't know about any of this. The sacrifices, the lives that were saved because of people like Jackson and Charlie." Ben placed a hand on his grandson's shoulder, his grip firm but gentle. "These stories aren't easy to tell, Liam. It's not just about the loss. It's about honoring the men we lost. It's about keeping their memory alive, carrying forward their bravery, their selflessness." He paused, a soft smile breaking through his somber expression. "It's part of why we still gather, why we still carry these coins. Each one is a reminder." Liam nodded, his own voice barely a whisper. "Thank you for sharing this with me. I don't think I'll ever look at things the same way." Harry chuckled, his gruff laughter breaking the tension. "Good. That's the idea, son. You don't just hear these stories. You carry them. Pass them on someday. That's how they live on." Around the table, the men raised their mugs in a silent toast. Liam joined them, his own heart swelling with pride and gratitude. He knew that he'd been entrusted with something precious, an understanding of sacrifice that transcended generations, a bond that could never be broken. Ben caught his grandson's eye, a soft smile on his lips as he raised his mug. In that moment, no words were needed. Liam understood that he was now part of something bigger than himself, a legacy that would endure long after they were all gone. As the sun began to set outside the diner, casting a golden glow over the gathering, Liam felt the weight of his grandfather's stories settle deep in his heart. He realized that he wasn't just hearing tales of sacrifice and bravery. He was becoming part of a lineage that honored courage, loyalty, and an unbreakable bond. And he knew that no matter where life took him, he would carry those values forward, just as his grandfather and his friends had done before him. The following morning, Liam found himself standing on his grandfather Ben's front porch, the weight of the previous day's stories lingering in his mind. The morning light bathed the house in a soft glow, And as he looked around, Liam felt a newfound sense of connection to the world his grandfather and his friends had come from, a world of sacrifice, courage, and unbreakable bonds. As he raised his hand to knock, the door swung open and there was Ben already expecting him. "You're up early," Ben noted with a slight smile, gesturing for Liam to come inside. "I couldn't stop thinking about what you and the others shared yesterday," Liam admitted as he entered. "I feel like I'm seeing everything with new eyes." Ben nodded, understanding the sentiment well. Stories like those have a way of changing how you see things, don't they? Liam took a seat, watching as his grandfather moved about the room with his usual calm demeanor. Ben reached for a small, worn box on the shelf, his hand steady but purposeful. He opened the box, and inside lay a coin that glinted faintly in the morning light. The challenge coin that had traveled with him through battles and back, a coin that represented more than words could say. "Liam," Ben began, holding the coin carefully in his hand, "I've been thinking, and I want you to have this." He extended the coin toward his grandson, who stared at it, understanding the gravity of the moment. Liam hesitated, his hand trembling slightly as he reached out to accept the coin. "Grandpa, I don't think I'm ready to take something so meaningful. I mean, it's yours. You've been through so much with it." Ben shook his head, his gaze warm but resolute. "I didn't go through those things alone, Liam. Every man who fought beside me, who saved lives, who didn't make it home, they're all part of this coin. And now it's your turn to carry forward the spirit it represents." Ben's words sank deep into Liam's heart. He looked down at the coin in his hand, feeling its cool, heavy weight, the engraved words on one side, the faint marks of time on the other. It was more than a symbol. It was a commitment, a reminder of the strength and values his grandfather had imparted to him. Taking a deep breath, Liam finally looked up, his voice filled with both pride and responsibility. "Thank you, Grandpa. I promise I'll do my best to live up to this." Ben gave a small nod, his eyes misty as he watched Liam accept the gift. "I know you will. Remember, though, it's not about grand gestures. The torch you're carrying now, it's about living each day with integrity, standing up for what's right even when no one's watching." Liam held the coin tightly, letting his grandfather's words settle in. He understood now that this was about more than just bravery on a battlefield. It was about the bravery to live a life true to his values, to support his community, and to be there for others just as his grandfather and the other veterans had always been for one another. After a moment of comfortable silence, Ben gestured toward the front porch and they both stepped outside. They stood side by side, looking out at the quiet street, both reflecting on what this moment meant. Ben broke the silence, his voice gentle. "You know, there were times when I questioned if it was all worth it, all the sacrifices and losses. But seeing you now, seeing you understand this legacy, it reminds me that it was. The world needs people willing to carry this torch, Liam. People who believe in honor, respect, and loyalty." Liam felt his chest swell with pride. "I won't let you down, Grandpa. I'll carry it forward just like you did." Ben placed a hand on Liam's shoulder, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "I know, son, and don't forget, you're never alone in this. We're all part of something bigger. The brotherhood isn't just the men you met yesterday. It's everyone who stands up for others, who chooses kindness over convenience and courage over comfort." With one last nod, Liam slipped the coin into his pocket, feeling its weight as a comforting presence. He knew that this wasn't just a chapter in his life. It was the beginning of a path that would shape who he was, a journey that would carry the values and lessons of the generation before him. As they stood together, watching the world come to life around them, Liam understood that the torch had been passed, and that he was ready to carry it forward. Ben showed us that real strength isn't about size or age, it's about loyalty, courage, and the bond between friends. In a world that sometimes feels disconnected, his story reminds us to honor the people who've paved the way and to stand up for each other in times of need. If this story touched you, be sure to hit subscribe to keep up with more stories of resilience and hope. Together, let's spread these values far and wide. Stories like Ben's keep the best of us alive.